Hello, everyone. We will give everyone about 20 or 30 seconds to get snapped in, joined, and I'll go ahead and get us started here in a moment. Nice to see everyone in the chat too. All right, let's do it. I will go ahead and get us started here. Welcome back, everyone, to the next installment in our recently launched CourseDog Customer Success webinar series. These webinars fit into our team's broader strategy for how we engage with customers to share resources and ongoing training in order to help you achieve successful outcomes and do more using CourseDog. So we have two goals in mind as we deliver these webinars, and we'll ask for your feedback in the form of a brief follow-up survey emailed to everyone after the webinar. Number one, we want to enable customers to get the most out of your products by mastering important concepts and functionality available to you and your CourseDog products. At the same time, we want to also guide you towards successful outcomes and prevent issues by sharing our troubleshooting tips, best practices, and FAQs, arming you with the information to help you feel confident in using new functionality. Also, a quick note on intended audience. The materials and content in these webinars are tailored towards CourseDog administrators. If you're a super admin, product champion, or a power user on the functional teams we engage with directly, you're definitely in the right place. If that's not you, you're still welcome to engage and participate. Just be aware, we may cover areas you don't have access to see or configure. And lastly, if you're still in implementation and not yet live with your scheduling product, you might not have had the chance to learn about today's topics as part of your implementation with your project manager, but that's okay. You'll be a step ahead when you get to that content during your implementation. So for today's session, we're covering how to get started with the Room Optimizer and scheduling, and we have a few specific objectives in mind. We'd like to hit on a functional overview of how to get started and run the optimizer. So we'll go through the flow, the configuration, the settings, all the way through the results, and how to merge room assignments into your live schedule. Along the way, we'll also share our best practices, tips, and troubleshooting techniques that we'll cover as we go. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Brian Smith from the product team, who's also going to share a preview of some of the upcoming enhancements and share some of his recent research with customers our team has been conducting and where the optimizer is going next. So as I mentioned, I'm joined today with my colleague and co-host for today, Brian Smith, product manager at CourseDog. Brian, anything you want to mention about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Lucio. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining today. Like Lucio said, I'm a product manager here at CourseDog, working on scheduling, events, and faculty workload management. So as we go throughout today, I'll be sharing a couple different slides and sharing some of the things that we're working on in the future of the optimizer. And I see some folks in the chat who have given us feedback throughout that research process. So thank you all for the time and for joining us today, and looking forward to sharing all about the optimizer. Thanks.
Likewise, I'm Lucio Forti, Customer Success Manager on the team here at CourseDog. I work with a range of small and large institutions, helping teams get the most out of our scheduling, events, curriculum, and catalog products. So today, we're going to master the art of the optimizer and scheduling, so let's get started. Number one, first thing to address here is to answer, what is the optimizer? So we'll cover that. The optimizer is really a tool that can assign a room to any section in a given term, provided those sections have an instructor and meeting pattern already set. You have the ability after running the optimizer to review the room assignments resulting from that optimizer run and take the decision if you'd like to apply all or some of those room assignments to the actual schedule. So in terms of value for your team and for customers, really the main two things to point out here. One is this is a way to automate a significant part of the room assignment process using a data-driven approach to best utilize limited space while maximizing student success. And second thing to point out here would be this is a way to save administrators time with the task of room assignments where this can be utilized and make sense in your process. So there are a few key concepts and things to consider before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of the functionality and the interface in CourseDog. So let's cover that first. Oops, continue over here. Right, so before we get into creating an optimizer run, we've gathered a checklist of things to think about and have ready in advance before running the optimizer. Number one starts with your rooms and room settings. So we wanted to point out here, first thing to think about would be to consider the room capacity, room type, room features, the building, the room status, and also wanted to point out within the room settings, the filter for allowed sections within each room's settings, thinking about making sure these are up to date and accurate. So this is a good time to make any changes accordingly in your SIS or in CourseDog, depending on your integration, your configuration, source of truth, and setup to your rooms. Another tip to call out here specifically is to review the exclude from optimizer setting that we've highlighted here in the screenshot in red. And be sure this is set as expected on any rooms you'd like to use this setting for. This setting really, it designates the room as a space the optimizer should not assign to any sections, even if the room is available. So keep this in mind as an option for any special rooms you prefer to only assign manually or shouldn't be used in the optimizer. Also, as a troubleshooting tip, if you are expecting the optimizer to assign a certain room, but not seeing that in that room in the results, this would be one of the first things to check in the room settings to make sure it hasn't accidentally or mistakenly had this setting toggled to yes and it is therefore being excluded by the optimizer. Okay. Second thing to consider is your rollover and the sections themselves. So the rollover, of course, should be completed before running the optimizer, and sections should be set up with a few key data points. The first one being meeting patterns assigned on sections. So if any sections are missing, I want to make sure to add a meeting pattern before running the optimizer. The next thing would be enrollment capacity, so ensuring that this isn't missing and capacities are up to date on sections. Best practice would also be to assign instructors as well before running the optimizer, especially if you plan on leveraging instructor preferences, which can drive the room assignments later in the optimizer. Lastly, if you are including any cross-listed or linked sections in the optimizer run, make sure these relationships have been added on the relevant sections first. The optimizer can take into account any assigned relationships and suggest the same room accordingly on those sections. Another tip to be aware of is the optimizer will not assign a new room assignment if a room is currently assigned on that section. So this is something to keep in mind in your rollover process. If you'd like to use the optimizer for certain courses, then make sure to not include the room assignments in your rollover, or you could just remove them yourself before running the optimizer. Okay, finally, third thing to consider here is instructor preferences. This is completely optional, but if you are gathering instructor preferences for the term, review these to ensure that they've been submitted by your faculty or have been added to the instructor profiles in CourseDog. As another tip here, if you're not using the preference forms to collect this directly from instructors, you can alternatively enter those preferences in their profiles on their behalf, or schedulers can add any desired room preferences onto sections using the section dashboard. So really, to summarize here, preferences are not required for the optimizer, but can help drive better results if you are including them. Okay, once you have the necessary inputs and setup in place for the term, you're ready to think about the best timing and strategies for running the optimizer, which I'll let Brian share a few more of our recommendations and advice here next.
Yeah, thanks, Lucio. We already have some questions coming into the QA option that you all have on your Zoom screen. So feel free to keep tossing those questions in the QA, and we'll try to answer them as they come up or during the QA at the end. So thanks for those. Yeah, picking up where we just left off from getting some of your settings taken care of, we recommend giving yourselves about 3 weeks of time before you need to complete your scheduling process to get started with the optimizer. That's not absolutely required if you're an old pro using the optimizer and have very consistent settings that you've used a couple of times and know exactly what you want to do. Maybe 2 weeks would work, but as we start getting closer and closer to the start of the term, if there's any changes you want to make, the more time you can give yourself, the better. So 3 weeks is often a great point of the scheduling cycle to begin using the optimizer. And this is also because it can be really helpful to use the optimizer to assign a big chunk of rooms to start your scheduling process, save a lot of that manual work. Then maybe you want to go in, make some more manual tweaks, do a couple of smaller optimizer runs, and start honing things in across those weeks leading up to the end of the scheduling cycle. The key thing to think about here is that, especially if this is your first or maybe second term using the optimizer, we don't recommend starting just a few days before the schedule is due or a week and a half before the schedule is due, running the optimizer and expecting it to fill everything out perfectly. We always want you to leave time for manual tweaks, time to chat with your CSM, to get support if you have questions or want to redo an optimizer run. So that's why we recommend giving about 3 weeks to play with your optimizer results, make tweaks, do new runs, anything like that. And we also generally suggest to, think about what may happen if you want to do several optimizer runs. We have some schools who will run the optimizer 20 times because they run it department by department, or they use it to continually hone in their results run after run. So a best practice to think about is maybe giving yourself about time for 10 runs. If that ends up being something that you want to do. Again, that might not always be the case, but these are just best practices and some good guidelines to keep in mind to give yourself enough time to make sure you have the perfect schedule before wrapping up the scheduling cycle. And then in the second part of the slide here, you'll see some different strategies for organizing those optimizer runs. Like I said, we have a lot of schools who will run things department by department, or maybe unit by unit or school by school for a couple of different departments. That may be because those departments share the same buildings or the same spaces, or have very similar, overlapping groups of faculty teaching these sections. And it can be nice to kind of chunk those different groups together, review the results, merge them in, refine them, and then go run the optimizer for your next set of sections, or just your next set of sections that you want to optimize for. We also have some customers who will run the optimizer for certain types of sections, and we'll talk about some of the filters that are available. But you could, for example, run the optimizer for all of your lab sections, or all of your biology lab sections, or all of your courses with expected enrollment of more than 200. If you want to focus first on optimizing for some of your in-demand auditorium spaces or your in-demand lab spaces, once those are locked in, run the optimizer for all of your remaining sections. There's just a lot of different ways to think about how to break down your runs in order to take care of your highest priority sections and spaces first, and then return to some of your other sections later. And circling back to the first bullet on the screen, that's why it's great to give a little bit of extra time for any testing, experimentation, or you might discover, hey, this is actually a better way for us to run the optimizer this term, and having a couple of weeks and time to do a couple runs can just improve the process overall. So just some best practices to keep in mind there, and definitely always feel free to check in with your CSM. They will always have ideas on different ways you can set up your series of optimizer runs.
Thanks, Brian. Definitely a lot of good advice and content there. But yeah, with those concepts covered, we're ready to actually dive into the process and create an optimizer run in CourseDog. So to get started here, you'd click on the optimizer in the main navigation on the left side in scheduling, and you pick the desired term that you're working on. So as a reminder and another tip here, you can adjust the current scheduling term, which is a setting in CourseLog that drives the default term that you see here in this dropdown and other dropdowns in scheduling, including the section dashboard, if you change this in your term settings. So continuing from here, click on the blue Add Optimizer Run button to create a new run, and then you'll arrive at this page. So the first thing that you'll do in your newly created run is to give it a name. We're calling our example here the biology department run number 1. Below the name for the run, you'll see the department filter, which will allow you to filter the run to only look at and assign rooms to sections in the departments that you've chosen here. Below that, the send email notification field it's a yes/no option that will only be sent to you, the creator, the person creating the run, once the run has completed in the last step. All right, easy peasy. So far, so good. As you scroll down the general settings, you'll see a slider for minimum seat utilization. Minimum seat utilization dictates the maximum size room the optimizer can assign to a specific section relative to that section's max enrollment capacity. So remember, enrollment capacity was part of our pre-flight checklist and one of the inputs that the optimizer considers. As an example here, if this slider is set to 50%, then a room with a capacity of 40 can be assigned by the optimizer to a section that has an enrollment capacity of 20, because that section is utilizing 50% of that room's seats. So for that same section, if you were to change the enrollment to be set to be lower at 19 instead, then the optimizer wouldn't assign this room because we're not meeting the 50% seat utilization threshold that's been defined here with this setting. Continuing further down on that page, you'll see the back-to-back preferences. These settings help ensure instructors are teaching sections in the same room if their sections are scheduled back-to-back and can fit into these parameters. In the preference dropdown at the top, if this is set to yes, then the same room yes/no setting further down should also be set to yes, along with a maximum number of back-to-back sections, the max number below that. The enrollment difference slider at the bottom can help prevent scenarios where a small section of, say, 5 students is being assigned in the same room back-to-back with a much larger section in a hall meant to accommodate 100 people. The default setting here is 100%, which is the same thing as saying the difference in enrollment is not a factor to be considered by the optimizer. So as an example, you can reduce this down to 50% if you want a section with 20 students to not be considered back-to-back in the same room before a section that has a capacity of 100 students. In other words, that would be a difference that would be greater than the 50% threshold that we're setting here. Okay, moving on, as Brian mentioned, you'll see the filters towards the bottom of this page where you can more granularly manage what sections you'd like to include in this run and assign rooms for. The common filters used here are things like section status, setting this to section status is not canceled, the department, or courses in order to exclude specific courses which you'd like to assign rooms manually. So this really covers the basics in the general settings and should be sufficient for many schools to continue from here and run the optimizer. However, we do offer several additional optional advanced settings, which I'll let Brian pick up and talk more about here.
Yeah, thanks, Lucian. A lot of this we'll also cover in a brief demo at the end of this session, so you can actually see these things live in addition to the screenshots, but here we just want to talk through them in a little bit more detail. And yeah, after completing your general settings, you have a couple of advanced settings that you can use here. So you have the ability to give preference to standard meeting patterns. Generally, we would suggest that if you are using non-standard meeting patterns, you can set this to yes, so that you can weight the preferences for sections using standard meeting patterns higher than those sections using non-standard meeting patterns. If you set this to no, they'll kind of be weighted evenly, which is okay as well. This is, again, another great reason to start early, check in with your CSM, have them take a look at your environment. They'll understand how many non-standard meeting pattern sections you have, how many standard meeting pattern sections you have, and can give a recommendation as to what to do with this specific setting. And then another option we have here is selection length preferences, section meeting day preferences, and enrollment preferences. These are just options to give preference to certain types of sections. Similar to if you wanted to do an optimizer run first for all of your very large sections, maybe you have a small number of intro level lectures that are 75 minutes instead of 60 minutes, and you want to give preference to those sections and make sure they get the room they need. You could set that in the section length preference, and you could do a similar thing if there's a specific day or enrollment size that you want to give preference to in your optimizer run. And then from there, you also have the option to use these weight sliders. Many of these weight sliders apply to instructor preferences. So if you are using instructor preferences, this is a great way to determine which preferences you want to give a lot of weight to in the optimizer versus which preferences are less important. Things like conflict times and preferred times are kind of the most commonly heavily weighted options, because those are some of the preferences that often for instructors are most important. When do they want to teach? When can they absolutely not teach? Maybe you want to give some extra weight to those. One thing to look out for is that turning any of these up to 10 can make it very difficult for the optimizer to run. It will treat that weight as a hard constraint, as in, if we can't match this section with this instructor to their preferred time, we will not assign this section a room, which can work well. It may be a case where you're actually looking for that in a certain type of optimizer run, but it can often make it very difficult for the optimizer to assign as many rooms as you would like. So just something to look out for. If you feel very strongly about one of these weights, set it to 9. If you want the optimizer to treat it as a hard, non-negotiable setting, you can set that to 10. The other item I want to call out here would be the preferred room type building or room features. This is also coming from instructor preferences. And if they do have for one of their sections, hey, I really need a whiteboard, or I really need a podium because my teaching lends itself to this particular feature, you can also weight those fairly heavily. So that's another just commonly used weight that people often will turn up to 8 or 9.
Thanks, Brian. Just picking up from there, once you've configured and set up your general settings and optionally your advanced settings, the next screen that you'll see in the flow is going to continue on to the sections conflicts page, which will get you here. So this page really displays section level conflicts that can impact the optimizer's output. Conflicts are really cases that will prevent the optimizer from assigning a room to that section. You should generally aim to resolve as many conflicts as possible on this page, although it's not necessary to clear every conflict in order to run the optimizer. Also note, this page will include conflicts detected on any section in the term. So for example, if you're filtering the run to only work on sections in the biology department, the system will still detect and present you here with conflicts for sections in other departments for visibility. There are a few key conflict types shown here under the conflict heading on the right. The first one says, this section does not have a max enrollment capacity, which would be easy to address. That would be a matter of adding the enrollment capacity on the section. The second type that you might see here is sections with double booked rooms. So the optimizer will never allow double booked rooms. If there is a section with a pre-existing double booking on it, the optimizer can still run. These sections will just appear as unsuccessful in the results. So to clear out this type of conflict from the list, you can reassign the section to another room or assign a same room relationship if 2 sections should truly be assigned in the same room. The optimizer will allow double bookings for sections if you're using a same room relationship. So you can click on a section from here update its max enrollment capacity, save the section, and return to the list to continue addressing the next conflict. You can refresh the page in your browser to remove, drop off that section from the list here. And you can also click out and back to all runs or reopen this run and continue working from here. But the main thing is this list will update every time you load this page. Similarly, as you continue to the next step, we're getting close to actually running the optimizer. This step will bring up the bottlenecks page, which will highlight other potential issues before you run the optimizer. The types of warnings that appear on this table include the no room with required capacity message that's shown here. This would occur if there are no rooms with a high enough capacity to meet the enrollment capacity on a given section. So the possible solutions here would be to click on the section and change the enrollment capacity if this is adjustable, or as an alternative would be to move that section to a different time when there are more available rooms with the required size. If you are making edits to section enrollment capacity directly from here, same as the last step, you can refresh the page, update the results on this table. So once you've reviewed and addressed any bottlenecks, you can click next to continue to the final step. When you get here, you'll have a chance to back out or click on the click to optimize button to run the optimizer. Once you do that, a time estimate will be displayed at the bottom showing the completion percentage and estimated time remaining to complete the run. Based on the selected inputs in the previous steps, the progress bar here can indicate the run may take just under 2 hours, 119 minutes to complete. In practice, really most runs are completed within 5 to 10 minutes. And for larger schools that are including 10 to 20,000 sections within the same run, you can expect to see slightly longer times around the 20 to 30 minute range. Once the optimizer run is in progress and you see this bar, you can leave this page to continue working in other areas in the system. And if you've turned on the email notification in the first step, you'll receive that email as soon as the run completes. So once you reach this point, congrats, you've completed your optimizer run at this point and ready to review the results, which I'll let Brian pick up and continue in covering.
Yeah, thanks, Lucio. So at this point, you'll be in your results view within an optimizer run. This overview tab just gives you kind of an overview of the results of your run, how many conflicts there still are, what percentage of the sections we've optimized do have conflicts. And you also have some other views on the screen that we'll look at in the demo that give you a little bit more insight into how successful the run was, and how many different rooms were used, how many sections were assigned, just some high level metrics of that nature about the run. And then from there, the next place you want to go is the results view. This is where you'll see the actual results section by section or course by course of your run. And this is something we'll definitely cover in the demo. This is where you can also determine if you want to merge these results or not. By merge, we mean save. So when you're looking at this results view, think of it as a preview. These are results that we're showing you that you could save these sections. If you would like to save this full optimizer run or specific results from this optimizer run, you can do that, but you're also not tied to any of these. So when you complete an optimizer run, we're not automatically overwriting what you already have. We're presenting these sections to you and saying, if you would like to use these, go ahead, or if you would like to create another run until you have better results, feel free to go ahead and do that before you save. But this results view will allow you to go section by section, look at the room that's assigned, and decide if you like the result and would like to save it or not. And then it'll be easy to filter by which sections had rooms assigned versus which sections did not have rooms assigned. We'll talk more about that in the demo. And this is where we're getting into merging results. You'll have a blue merge all results button that you can use if you've taken a peek through the optimizer results, or maybe you've run it for a small number of sections and you're happy with the results. Click merge all results, and these results will be saved. The section will be assigned that room. When you open these up in the section dashboard, you'll see these room assignments updated. or you can merge individual sections. There's a button there next to the section name where you can go section by section and merging specific results. If maybe there's just a few results that you do like, go ahead and do that. Or if you want to just be very careful and go section by section, saving your results, this button will help you with that as well. And here we're looking at the conflicts tab. Again, this gives you an overview of how many sections have conflicts, but you can also filter by conflict type. So you may be especially interested in resolving instructor conflicts or other rule violations that you have first. You can filter by those conflicts and review those first, or we'll just show you an overall view of all the conflicts that were produced, and you can take a look at those just as one big group. Here we also have the bottlenecks tab. This is something that Lucio covered earlier, where before you complete a run, you'll be able to review any bottlenecks. Maybe it's a bottleneck with, you don't have enough space for a certain size of section, a certain type of section. You can review that before the run. But if any of those bottlenecks weren't resolved before the run, or any have appeared as we tried to assign rooms, we'll surface those here as well. And it's a great chance to understand a little bit better where you're lacking the right type of space, or where you don't have the right amount of rooms available to support what you need to support. And then you may need to make some manual edits or structure your optimizer run in a different way. And this input settings tab just saves the settings that you use. So if you want to go back and create a new run, but review what you did last time and make some tweaks, this is a great way to go back and check and understand what you did previously, what you did over time, reference some older runs, and use that information to inform future settings that you want to configure.
That's perfect. Thanks, Brian, for an overview of the results section and key things to look for and to do after your run is completed. So congrats, well done. Your optimizer run should be complete and you're able to review the results at this point. Before we switch gears into a live demo and overview of what we've talked through, we'd like to share a quick recommendation here for those who are new to the optimizer and ready to jump in for the first time. If you're unsure where to begin with configuring the optimizer settings for your first run, or our recommendation here is really to start with the default settings and also keep the weights in the advanced settings section at their default values, which is 50% at first. As there's a good number of data inputs and settings that can be adjusted to drive the results, we highly recommend running the optimizer several times as you get started, using it in a term for the first time, and making small changes before finding the ideal settings that are dialed in specifically to your institution, which can be reused for the next term's first run. So this is a great segue, as Brian has mentioned a few times, a great topic to reach out to your CSM to consult and discuss or ask about specific settings during your next check-in call as well. With that, let's continue here for a live demo and overview. So I'll hand it back to Brian to hop into the app and give us a tour of what we just talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Lucio. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared here. And we're going to start by looking at a completed run here. I think a lot of the optimizer settings that we covered in a lot of detail. So what I want to focus on with this demo is what to do with your overview and your results view once you get here. So there's a couple settings that you can use to filter through the results that you're seeing here. You have checkboxes for some different types of results. Scheduled successfully, meaning we assigned a room to this section. Scheduled with issues, meaning we assigned a room to this section, but there may still be a conflict. It was a conflict that is probably that probably has something to do with instructor preferences. So we still decided to go ahead and assign this room because it's not an instructor double booking. It's not a room double booking. It's a more minor conflict, probably with instructor preferences. So we're flagging it as this is scheduled, but we think you should review it, as opposed to scheduled successfully, you're good to go. Then we have not scheduled, which would mean we did not find a good fit for this room, maybe because of instructor preferences, because of room availability, capacity, whatever the case might be. We don't think we have a good fit for this room right now. And then we have excluded, which would be sections that were flagged with exclude from the optimizer. So if you decided you didn't want to optimize these sections, we will save them here, but just mark them excluded. So I'm going to select two of these checkboxes, scheduled successfully and scheduled with issues. Here's my merge all results button. So if I want to merge everything I see from this run, this is going to merge everything. So not scheduled rooms won't be merged because there's no room assigned, but scheduled successfully and scheduled with issues will be merged. Alternatively, I have this merge section button here, and that's where I can merge an individual section. So if I want to go ahead and save this section, yes, merge, I can go one by one. This is a demo account, so we're often going to see some errors like that, but you'll be able to merge individual sections as you go through here. And you can also dive a little bit deeper into this course. If there's anything you want to check out, and you have our demand analytics here, you can take a look at that, or take a look at basically your course template here in a different view. You'll also be able to filter these results down. So you may have completed an optimizer run for thousands of sections, but you want to start by by merging sections for your math department or reviewing the results for your biology department. You can filter using course and section attributes here to take a look at those specific courses and specific sections that you want to review first. And you can also toggle between a section level view and a course level view. You may want to view by courses because you want to start with your 101 courses and merge all of those specific sections or review all of those specific sections, or you can just look at all sections in this view here. So just some different functionality there. And of course, there's a search feature as well if you want to search for a specific course or a specific section. Another option here is the export feature. So if you want to export your results, look at them in a CSV, or share these results with another member of your team, you have this option as well. You have the bottlenecks option that we talked about. A pretty common example of a bottleneck that will come up is a section that is maybe too large for the remaining spaces that you have available. So that's what we're trying to flag here in the bottlenecks, just pointing out some of the sections you may not have the right available spaces for at the moment. And then here's this overview tab that we already touched on. I wanted to call out this current trends box over here. This can be helpful to get a sense of how many things like instructor preferences you're satisfying, how many rooms are actually being used. Sometimes we'll see optimizer runs where just because of the way your sections are structured with enrollment and the available rooms and their capacity, maybe the optimizer is assigning a lot of sections to a small number of rooms, and you may want to tweak some of your optimizer settings to assign them more broadly. It's just another way to get a feel for what the optimizer is doing, so that can be helpful. And you'll also be able to take a look at kind of the hourly and daily distribution of your sections to make sure that you don't have too many sections assigned in a specific kind of hotspot or a day that is more popular than you would like it to be if you're aiming for even section distribution across your days and across your hours on campus. That's what I wanted to cover here just in this demo. I wanted to give a live view of what your overview and results tabs look like. But if there are any questions or anything anybody wants to throw in the chat about things they would like to see a little bit more of, feel free to go ahead and do that. And if we have time, we can try to touch on those items. But for now, I'll pass it back to Lucio to continue.
Yep, I'll go ahead and share my screen over here. 1 second. So really wanted to pick up again here on some of the recent research that the team has been doing, feedback from customers, and just if we can touch on some of our upcoming plans and related roadmap items, Brian.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we spent the last quarter, basically, chatting with as many customers as possible who have been using the optimizer or who have been interested in using the optimizer to understand some of the pain points they were coming across and some of the ideas they had for improvements. So like I mentioned at the beginning, I know some folks are here who we have chatted with and really appreciate that feedback. And if anyone who would like to chat with us is here and hasn't had a chance, I didn't reach out or anything like that, please feel free to let us know. Would love to hear what feedback you have for us. And our plan is to invest pretty heavily in the optimizer in the coming quarters to make it more usable. We want to make the experience of setting it up, running it, and understanding your results easier and more efficient so that you can make even better section assignments more quickly as part of your scheduling process. What that looks like in the immediate future is that in Q3, which is from now across the next 3 months, we're going to build the ability to run the optimizer for a subset of rooms. So in the optimizer, you already have this functionality for running the optimizer for a subset of sections. You can apply some filters, determine which sections you want to run the optimizer for, and run it just for those sections. If you recall earlier, we were suggesting things like specific departments, specific labs, specific section sizes. That functionality already exists, but this will give you the ability to hone in on a subset of rooms. Maybe you have a very large campus where faculty and students can't be expected to spend part of their day in the bio building and part of their day in the math building all the way across campus. You can start by running your optimizer just for a quadrant of the campus or a specific building or a specific subset of rooms. Focus on that, assign your sections, and move on. Or you can do things like running the optimizer just for buildings that are owned by a specific department. If they are a very high enrollment department, very popular, and it's tough to find space for their courses, you can start with those rooms and just assign a subset of sections to a subset of rooms until you've perfected that group of sections and then move on to another section. So we want to give a little more flexibility with the way you set up and complete your optimizer runs. And that's what we're focusing on in Q3. In Q4 and beyond, we have a lot of ideas. One of the ideas that we actually got a question about in the chat already is merging groups of results rather than all or one by one. So this would be something like filter or select a number of results, merge them all at once. That's something we've heard some requests for. And we do have some bigger ideas to kind of change the way that we give you as the user feedback on the optimizer, maybe some ways to give better suggestions and inform your next steps and say, hey, we think you ran the optimizer with these weights, but we think you should run it with these weights because this is the factor we're having a hard time optimizing for. So we want to try to make your experience with the optimizer better overall, easier to learn from, and just help make those runs quicker to improve on cycle by cycle. So that's what to look out for in Q3. We have a lot of big ideas about what to do in Q4 and beyond. So I'd love to hear more feedback and stay tuned to our Q3 roadmap deck, all of the product updates we send out just to stay in the loop on what we're building. And again, I think this is the third time I've said it. Reach out if you have ideas or want to chat about the optimizer. We'd love to continue all of these conversations. So please do get in touch.
That's great, Brian. I think what you covered, especially in talking about running the optimizer on a subset of rooms, in addition to combining that with a subset of sections, I think you've already answered one or two of the questions in the Q&A section along the way. But with that, at this point, would love to welcome any wider questions from the group today using the Q&A feature in Zoom to share your questions with us. This is also a good time to mention for any technical issues, our support team is also ready and able to assist as soon as you send us details through a ticket in the Help Center so we can track and resolve any support issues. So do we have anything else new? I see we have one more in the Q&A about using the preferred meeting times, meeting length when the meeting patterns and instructors are already assigned at this point before running the optimizer. So I think the question here is about using preferences.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I can take this one. So those two settings actually apply to the time optimizer, which we're not really covering here, and we only recommend folks using in very specific circumstances. So Jessica, great question. I should have called that out as I mentioned those. Those are time optimizer specific settings. I think in the weights, those are the only two time optimizer specific settings, though I would need to double check that. But yeah, for the room optimizer, which is what we're discussing here and what most folks will be using with very, very rare exceptions, those wouldn't be something you need to worry about.
I also saw a question about how to add instructor preferences directly to the instructor's profiles without using the preference forms to gather those. And happy to share my screen here as well. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think process what to do here would be, as an admin, you can go into your instructors and see the dash with all of your instructors in the system, which I'll click on over here. And within the instructor, if you open them while you're looking at a particular term, you can click the edit button to edit the preferences or add preferences if you don't have any for that particular instructor.
Yep. And this is like everything in CourseDog governed by your role-based access. So the roles and permissions that you set up, not any user would necessarily have access to the ability to directly edit instructor preferences, but you can configure those if you do have the permissions for this. And I'll give another little tease for Q3. We are planning to finish in the next 2 to 3 months here the ability to put instructor preferences through a workflow. So if you want to use instructor preferences, but don't love the idea of instructors being able to set them and then those preferences being factored into the optimizer, we'll give you the ability to put those preferences through a workflow so that they can be reviewed by an admin, edited, reviewed again, and edited by the instructor until the preferences are in a place that everybody can agree on. And then we can use those as an input into the optimizer. So right now, those can't be put through a workflow. They can be created by the instructor, edited directly here, like Lucio is saying, but we are going to give the ability to put those through a workflow if that would help you use them in the optimizer.
Definitely. Thanks, Brian. I'm also curious for our customers on the call today. Let us know in the survey or in the chat here if you're interested in us doing a similar session just to go in depth on instructor preferences and the instructor preference forms and some of the best practices and how to get the most out of that. In the meantime, are there any other, it looks like we've hit on everything in the Q&A. We'll give folks another minute or two to submit any other last questions.
Yeah, Lucio, while we wait, we could also just show folks, if they're unfamiliar or are still in implementation, what instructor preference forms actually look like. It's not always one of the first things folks take a look at, so maybe worth covering here.
Sure. May need to do some digging for a term in our demo school that already has a preference form we can take a look at.
Yeah, and if not, we can, I think if you select new form, we have a couple of templates built here or recommended templates, either one. Yeah, just grab one of those. Yeah, and open that up. And I can just talk through these. So the preference, instructor preferences come from these preference forms, which are similar to other forms in CourseDog, forms where you'll build them, determine which questions to include or not. And we have a couple of default options for you here, such as things like which courses would you like to teach? Which times would you like to teach? What are your preferred room features? What is your preferred building? This gives faculty the ability to give their preferences and have them factored into the optimizer, depending on the weights you assign to them. And you have access to a couple of different questions here. So you may not want to give faculty the ability to say when they're not available, but you may want them to select their preferred courses or preferred room features. So you have lots of flexibility here in what you actually take in as a preference. And all you need to do is go to preferences, configure a couple of these forms, add the questions you would like to add, and then you can share these out via link. So Lucy, I think where you just were, maybe in preview. Yeah. If you open up the share tab, you can set a password for the form and share this link with instructors so they can complete it and fill out their preferences. And then, like I mentioned, coming soon, you'll also be able to ask instructors to complete a form that will go through a workflow. So you can take those preferences in, and you can even look at the responses tab there to gauge what the responses are coming in. How popular is a certain time or a certain room feature, a lot like something you might see in Typeform or Google Forms. So this is where those instructor preferences are coming from, and that's where we're pulling the data for those weights from, if you do want to configure those weights.
Fantastic. Looks like we have one more question in the Q&A. Is it possible to see utilization by classroom for a full week? I think this would be something in the optimizer results overview.
Yes, Lucy, if you open this up, this is a good question, Patty. We certainly have a way to get you this data. I would want to think about the best reports view to use for this. And it would depend if we're talking about optimizer results versus save section results. So if we're talking about sections that have been created, we could use a couple of reporting features we have in scheduling to get you, if not this specific report, a very good sense of it and something very similar. I think what we would want to do here is we don't have filtering on these views. So this from the actual optimizer results is the closest we could get. We can show you the hourly and daily distribution just based on the sections that you ran the optimizer for. And of course, in the future, if you run the optimizer for a specific subset of rooms, we can show you that data. We don't have exactly this report from the optimizer data, but from completed sections data, we could definitely chat with you about how to pull out a couple of different reports that would give you this data.
We have one more minute just for any other last questions before we switch gears to start wrapping up. And yes, last question, assuming that we'll be sharing the slide deck. Yes, so you will have received a poll in Zoom right now asking questions about interest on other potential products in our platform, which we're happy to follow up on. And then switching gears here to wrap up and confirm a couple of last details. Thanks again to everyone who took time to join us for our review of the optimizer today. We will follow up shortly with a copy of our slides, a link to the recording of this session, as well as links to a few helpful resources in our knowledge base that we've selected as the best tools to help you in your next steps. Look out for a follow-up email from Cassie at coursedog.com, which will also include a brief survey about the webinar. We'd love to hear how we're doing, what's working, and what we can do next time along with your feedback. So on behalf of the customer success team here at CourseDog, thank you, and we're looking forward to seeing you all at our conference in a few weeks during our next check-in online if you're unable to attend. But that's all I got. Brian, I'll give you the last word to close us out here.
Oh, yeah. Thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate all the questions. And one more plug to follow up if you have optimizer feedback or want to get any more support from us. Thanks for everybody's time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great one.